She's not the bride. That's what the text on his phone said. From Stacy, his ex, the one he swore was ancient history. My hands were literally placing our gold-trimmed name cards when I saw it. And the worst part? He'd already invited her. Secretly. Already involved her in planning my wedding arch. My company's reputation and my entire savings were tied to this event. Canceling would ruin me. He smiled, told me she was just a friend. But here's what he forgot. I've spent 20 years planning other people's perfect moments. And now, I'm planning his public reckoning. I never thought I'd be planning my own wedding again. Not after losing James to cancer 15 years ago, when even breathing felt like betrayal for those first raw years. But time has its own medicine, doesn't it? The kind that lets you build something new from scattered pieces. You know that moment when morning sun hits your kitchen just right? That's where I stood last Tuesday, watching light bounce off my engagement ring next to the coffee maker. 20 years of planning other people's perfect days had taught me every trick, every timeline, every vendor's weakness and strength. My laptop hummed nearby, color-coded spreadsheets waiting for final checks. Morning, beautiful. Ryan's architect voice, that smooth, measured tone that had first caught my attention at a venue walkthrough 2 years ago. He wrapped his arms around my waist, and I let myself lean back. Working already? Just double-checking the catering numbers. I tapped the nearest binder. Gloria's giving us that vintage champagne service as a personal favor. Always the perfectionist. He reached past me for coffee, his sleeve brushing my ring. That's why you're the best in the business. I smiled, remembering the first wedding I'd planned after James. The bride had been so young, so certain everything would go wrong. But I'd known even then, it's not about perfection. It's about control, about knowing which threads to pull when things unravel. Speaking of business, Ryan said, settling against the counter, I've been thinking about the guest list. Something in his tone made my fingers still on the keyboard. After 20 years reading couples' stress signals, you develop a sense for when seemingly casual conversations aren't casual at all. Oh? I kept my voice light, professional. The same tone I used with anxious mothers of the bride. I want to add a few people. Industry connections, you know, good for both our businesses. I nodded, though my stomach tightened. We'd already agreed on our numbers. Intimate, elegant, every seat carefully chosen. The final headcount was due to catering yesterday. Gloria will adjust for you. He smiled that easy smile that usually melted my concerns. You're Marla Grace. Everyone owes you favors. True enough. 2 decades of solving wedding disasters builds a network of grateful vendors. But favors are currency in this business, and I spend them carefully. Which connections? I asked, reaching for my planner. Old habits die hard. Everything gets documented. Just a few. He waved his hand vaguely. I'll email you the names. There it was again, that architect's precision suddenly gone soft around the edges. I've watched 1,000 couples navigate wedding tensions. The ones who get vague about details usually have reasons. Sure, I said, matching his casual tone. Just remember, every change affects 5 other elements. Seating charts, place cards, catering, budget. About the budget. He set his coffee down. I think we should pool more resources. Make it really spectacular. I thought of my carefully separated accounts. The business safety net I'd built after James, dollar by careful dollar. We agreed on the numbers months ago. Plans change. His phone buzzed and he checked it quickly, angling the screen away. That's what you always tell your clients, right? Yes, plans change. But control, that's different. Control is knowing which changes to accept and which ones need managing. I sipped my cooling coffee, watching him respond to whoever had texted. 15 years of rebuilding had taught me patience. 20 years of vendor contracts had taught me leverage. And 1 lost marriage had taught me to trust the quiet warnings in my gut. You're right, I said finally. Plans do change. Send me those names whenever you can. He kissed my cheek and headed for the shower, leaving his phone face down by the fruit bowl. I didn't touch it. Not yet. Experience had taught me something else too. People who are hiding things always leave evidence, usually in the form of receipts, texts, or paper trails. I turned back to my laptop, to my perfect timeline and vendor agreements, to the business I'd built from grief into empire. Ryan was right about one thing. Everyone did owe me favors, but he'd forgotten the other half of that equation. I knew all their secrets too. Morning sun still played across my ring, across the stainless steel counters and my row of organized binders. Everything looked calm, controlled, just as I'd arranged it. But underneath, questions were starting to press against that perfect surface, like air bubbles under fresh wallpaper. I've spent 20 years planning other people's perfect moments, but that afternoon, surrounded by timelines and vendor contracts spread across my lakeside kitchen counter, everything felt different. This was my wedding weekend, my second chance. You know that moment when the sun hits the lake just right and everything gleams like possibility? That's how my home looked that day, all clean lines and organized beauty. My Marla Grace Events binders stood at attention, color-coded tabs marking each detail I'd refined over months of planning. "This is going to be incredible," Ryan said, wandering in. From the deck, he picked up one of the prototype centerpieces, crystal and silver catching the light. "Everyone's going to talk about this wedding for years." I smiled, though something in his tone made me pause. Maybe it was the way he emphasized everyone, like the guests' opinions, mattered more than our actual marriage. But I pushed the thought aside. After losing my first husband, I'd learned to question my own doubts. The florist confirmed. "The arch design this morning," I told him, sliding the latest invoice into its folder. "And the caterer's doing that wine pairing you wanted for the main course." "Perfect." He crossed behind me, his hands settling on my shoulders. "Hey, speaking of perfect, let me handle that final guest list revision. You've got enough on your plate with all the vendor coordination." I felt my spine stiffen slightly under his touch. It was the third time this week he'd pushed to manage the invitations. "I don't mind," I said carefully. "It's literally my job to handle these details." "Exactly why you should take a break from it at home." His thumb traced my neck in that way that usually melted my resistance. "Trust me, okay? I've got this part. Remember how I mentioned 20 years of experience? That's 20 years of reading between lines, spotting the control wrapped in care. But I'd built my business on being the calm one, the professional who never let emotion crack her polish." "Sure," I said, reaching for my seating chart portfolio. "Whatever makes it easier." He dropped a kiss on my head. "You're the best. I'm going to grab a shower before dinner." I watched him head upstairs, waited for the water to start running. The house settled into that particular quiet that should have felt peaceful, should have felt safe. His phone lay on, the counter where he'd left it, screen dark against the marble. I'd never been the type to snoop. Trust matters in my business as much as discretion. But when that screen lit up, the preview banner pulsing like a warning flare, my eyes caught the first line before I could look away. "Can't wait to see you walk down the aisle." Everything in me went still. You know that moment when your mind tries to find innocent explanations while your gut already knows the truth? That's where I was, staring at those words glowing on his phone. I forced my hands to stay steady, arranging seating cards with mechanical precision. The water continued running upstairs, and each drop seemed to echo against my spinning thoughts. Would you look at the rest of that message? I'm betting you would, but sometimes knowing the whole truth in one hit is like swallowing broken glass. It'll tear you up inside before you can figure out what to do about it. So I just stood there, surrounded by all my perfect plans, watching that notification fade to black. 20 years of making other people's dreams come true, and suddenly mine was starting to look like smoke and mirrors. The shower shut off upstairs. I heard Ryan start humming, probably that song he wanted for our first dance. My fingers traced the edge of a place card with both our names printed in. Perfect gold script. Everything looked exactly the same as it had 5 minutes ago. The polished counters, the precise timelines, the gleaming lake beyond my windows. But that text sat in my mind like a crack in fine china. Once you see it, you can't unsee it, no matter how beautiful the pattern. I stood in our kitchen, staring at Ryan's phone while shower steam crept under the bathroom door. My fingers went numb around the edges of his case as I read the full message again. Can't wait to see you walk down the aisle, even if you're not the bride. S. You know that moment when your mind tries to protect you by suggesting maybe you're reading things wrong? Yeah, I had that flash of denial. But there it was, clear as the morning light hitting our granite countertops. A text from someone who definitely wasn't planning to just blend into the background of my wedding photos. I clicked the I, contact, though I already knew. Stacy lit up the screen, no cutesy nicknames or disguises. The same Stacy he'd sworn was ancient history over dinner last spring. I remember exactly how he'd said it, waving his wine glass like he was dismissing smoke. Just someone I dated in grad school. Nothing worth mentioning. The shower cut off. I waited, pulse hammering in my throat, while his footsteps moved from bathroom to bedroom. When he finally padded down the hallway in fresh clothes, hair still damp, I held out his phone. Kept my voice steady. 20 years of vendor negotiations came in handy right then. Want to explain this? He glanced at the screen. Just a quick look, but I caught the micro-expression that flashed across his face. Recognition, then calculation. But his smile spread easy as butter, like I was overreacting to some harmless joke. Oh, that? It's just Stacy being Stacy. He chuckled, reaching for me. You know how dramatic she can get. Actually, I didn't know that, because he'd never told me anything real about her until this moment. I stepped back before his hands could land on my shoulders. The message suggests she's attending our wedding. Amazing how calm I sounded, like we were discussing flower arrangements or cake flavors. When exactly did that invitation happen? He shrugged, but his eyes got, sharper, more focused. I added her to the list last week. She's been helping with the arch design, since she does high-end florals now. I thought it'd be a nice professional connection for you. The room tilted slightly. He'd not only invited his ex without telling me, he'd involved her in the actual planning. In my professional territory, in the ceremony that would make or break my company's reputation this season. Professional connection, I repeated. The words tasted like metal. And the flirty text? Is that professional too? Come on, Marla. He tried for another smile, took a step closer. It's just harmless nostalgia. You're reading way too much into this. When I didn't soften, he switched tactics. His voice got that patient tone he used when explaining architectural concepts to difficult clients. Look, Stacy is coming, as a friend. He stated it like a fact, already set in stone. She's good people, and she's excited for us. That's all this is. I wish you could have seen his face, so confident that his explanation would smooth everything over, so sure that I'd accept whatever story he was selling, because that's what I always did. Compromise was my superpower, right? My throat closed up as 20 years of wedding experience lined up the red flags I'd been ignoring. The way he'd insisted on handling the guest list himself. How he'd been fielding vendor calls lately, especially about the ceremony design. All those late-night work emails that made his phone buzz. But you want to know the worst part? That text wasn't even meant for me to see. If I hadn't been standing right there when his phone lit up, I'd have walked down that aisle blind, while they shared their little inside joke about the bride who didn't know she was part of a triangle. I stood there in our kitchen, my fingers still warm from where I'd held his phone, watching Ryan's face for any trace of shame. There wasn't any. Instead, he had that familiar, patient smile, the one he used when explaining architecture to clients who just didn't get it. You're making this bigger than it needs to be, Marla, he said, running a towel over his damp hair. Stacy and I have known each other forever. She's basically family. Family. The word hit me like ice water. You know what's funny about moments like this? Your mind starts pulling receipts, literal and figurative. Every late-night project meeting, every unexplained credit card charge, Every time he'd insisted on handling the guest list himself. They weren't red flags when they happened. But now they were burning crimson. And when exactly did you invite her? I kept my voice steady, the same tone I use with difficult mothers of the bride, professional, controlled. He shrugged, casual as Sunday morning. Few weeks back. Actually, and here's where he got that little gleam in his eye. She's been amazing with ideas for the ceremony. Wait till you see what we came up with for the floral arch. Have you ever felt your whole world tilt sideways while having to keep your feet perfectly still? That's what it was like, standing in my own kitchen, hearing how my fiancé and his ex had been planning parts of my wedding. Our wedding, the one I'd spent 20 years learning how to make perfect. I glanced at my office door, where 3 decades of vendor contracts and client testimonials lived in neat binders. Marla Grace Events wasn't just a business. It was my lifeline after losing my first husband, my identity in our small lakeside community. And this wedding, it was meant to be my masterpiece. Every florist, caterer, and venue owner in 3 counties had given me their best rates, called in favors, promised perfection because I was one of their own. The numbers started running through my head like a ticker tape of doom. Deposit after non-refundable deposit. Contracts signed, reputation staked. Canceling now wouldn't just mean a broken engagement. It would mean professional suicide. I'd be the wedding planner who couldn't even manage her own ceremony. The irony would kill my bookings faster than any bad Yelp review. Ryan was watching me, waiting for the explosion, the tears, the drama. I could see him preparing his next soothing speech, ready to play the patient, reasonable man dealing with an emotional woman. Instead, I gave him what he least expected, my best client service smile. "Of course," I said, smoothing my shirt with steady hands. "Invite whoever you like." His shoulders relaxed instantly. He stepped closer, probably aiming for a conciliatory hug. But I turned toward the coffee maker. "I need to check some timeline details," I said, keeping my voice light. "Want a fresh cup?" "See? I knew you'd understand," he said, already reaching for his car keys. "I've got that site meeting downtown. Don't wait up." As I listened to his car pull away, I stood very still, letting the kitchen's silence settle around me. My coffee had gone cold, but I barely noticed. Something else was crystallizing inside me, something sharp and clear and certain. You want to know the thing about wedding planners? We don't just organize parties, we're architects too in our way. We build moments, we structure memories, we know exactly how to make or break a perfect day. I picked up my planner and opened to our wedding date, my pen hovering over the perfectly organized timeline. The schedule I'd created suddenly looked different, less like a plan and more like a blueprint for something entirely new. "Of course, invite whoever you like," I'd told him. And I meant it. But I hadn't said anything about what would happen after they arrived. The morning sun hit our kitchen counter exactly like it always did. I'd memorized that light over 20 years of early client calls. How it caught the rim of my coffee mug, warmed the vendor contracts spread across the granite. Today, it felt different, though. Colder somehow. "Honey, these centerpiece mock-ups are perfect," Ryan called from the dining room. His voice carried that same easy charm that had first drawn me in. The florist really outdid herself. I kept my tone professional pleasant, the way I did with difficult clients. She's the best in 3 counties, never disappoints. You know that feeling, when you're swimming in deep water and suddenly you can't tell which way is up? That's how I felt, going through the motions of my morning routine. Every wedding planner knows the show must go on, even when your own heart is breaking behind the scenes. "I've got vendor calls all morning," I said, opening my laptop. "Need to confirm the timeline details." Ryan kissed my cheek as he grabbed his keys. "This is why you're the best, babe. Always on, top of everything." I waited until his car pulled out of the driveway before letting my shoulders drop. 20 years of handling wedding drama had taught me one thing: emotion clouds judgment. And right now, I needed crystal clear vision. The budgeting spreadsheet opened with a familiar click. I'd built this template myself, designed to track every penny spent on creating perfect days for other people. Now it would show me exactly what had been spent on destroying mine. Let's see what stories the numbers tell, I muttered, scrolling through line items. You'd be amazed how many secrets hide in plain sight when you know where to look. Something caught my eye. A transfer from our joint account labeled Professional Development. Funny thing about architect consultations, they usually come with specific project codes. This one didn't. My fingers moved automatically, pulling up our bank records. There it was, a charge from 3 weeks ago when Ryan had that crucial site visit out of state. The dates matched perfectly. Only the destination wasn't any construction site. It was Stacy's city. Remember that swimming feeling I mentioned? Now it felt like hitting bottom. I zoomed in on the transaction details. Hotel charges, dinner reservations, all paid for with money we'd saved together. Money meant for our future. The betrayal had a paper trail, neat as you please. The worst part? I'd taught him how to organize receipts this way. Keep everything transparent, I'd said, back when I thought we were building something real. It's just good business practice. My coffee had gone cold, but I barely noticed. Sometimes knowledge sits in your stomach like stones, and you have to decide whether to sink or start swimming. I closed the laptop with careful fingers, the way you'd close a book of evidence. Through the window, I could see the lake stretching out, peaceful as ever. It didn't care that my perfect plans were unraveling. Nature's funny that way, keeps right on being beautiful while human hearts crack apart. The question wasn't just about Stacy anymore. It wasn't even about the money, though watching our joint account fund their little rendezvous made my teeth ache. No, this was about what else might be hidden under that charming smile of his. What other receipts might be floating around? What other lies had I missed while I was busy trusting? My phone buzzed. Another vendor needing confirmation. I picked it up, professional mask sliding back into place. After all, I had a reputation to maintain. Marla Grace Events didn't stumble, even when Marla Grace herself was taking body blows. But as I dialed the number, my other hand was already reaching for my oldest friend's business card. Diane wasn't just my mentor, she was also the sharpest accountant I knew. And right now, I needed someone who could follow a money trail to all its bitter ends. That afternoon, I drove to Diane's office with my laptop burning a hole in my passenger seat. You know that feeling when your whole body's wound so tight you might snap? That was me. White-knuckling the steering wheel, jaw clenched hard enough to crack. Teeth. I'd known Diane for 20 years. She'd mentored me when I first started Marla Grace Events, taught me how to track every penny, build ironclad contracts. More than that, she'd been there after I lost my first husband, bringing over casseroles and brutal honesty in equal measure. Some folks call her cold. I call her backbone made visible. Her office hadn't changed in 2 decades. Same mahogany desk, same wall of accounting certificates, same crystal paperweight catching afternoon light. The familiar smell of coffee and paper files helped steady my hands as I pulled out my laptop. "Well?" she said, peering at me over reading glasses. "You look like hell warmed over." I let out a laugh that sounded more like a hiccup. "Remember when you told me to always keep receipts? Since the day you walked in here wearing rose-colored glasses and carrying dreams of wedding empire?" She set down her pen. "Spill it." So I did. Showed her the screenshot of Stacy's text, the bank statements, the vendor contracts Ryan had insisted on helping with. My voice only shook once, describing how he'd smiled while telling me his ex would be at our wedding. Diane didn't flinch, didn't offer empty comfort. She just reached for her legal pad and started writing in that precise handwriting of hers. "Screenshots," she said. "Bank statements. Every email thread about the wedding budget. And I want copies of those vendor contracts he touched." She looked up. "We're building a paper trail that'll hold up under a microscope." Relief flickered through my chest, then fear froze it solid, because evidence meant commitment, meant following through, meant burning bridges I'd spent months building. "He'll deny everything," I whispered. "Of course he will." Diane's voice could have chilled wine. Men, like that always do, Right until denial becomes impossible. She tapped her pen against the legal pad. Which is why we wait. Let him lay his own trail of breadcrumbs. Every receipt, every text, every business trip. It all builds the trap he'll walk into. I nodded, remembering the way Ryan had laughed off Stacy's message. I won't do anything messy. No scenes, no violence, not without proof. Good. She studied me over those reading glasses again. You know, he thinks that wedding's his crown moment. All those guests, all that attention. A slow smile spread across her face. Maybe it should be. What do you mean? Truth needs a stage, Marla. And you've built yourself one hell of a stage. Looking around her office, I caught a whiff of that old leather chair smell that always meant safety to me. Back when I was starting out, I'd sat in that same chair learning about profit margins and contract clauses. Now here I was, learning about a different kind of accounting altogether. So we gather evidence, I said slowly. And then what? Then we let this perfect ceremony he's so proud of become exactly what he deserves. She pulled out a fresh legal pad. Now let's go through these bank statements line by line. I want to know every penny he's moved, every date that doesn't add up. I felt my professional mask slip back into place, the one that got me through $1,000 flower disasters and last-minute venue changes. Diane saw it happen and nodded approvingly. That's my girl, she said. Cool head, clean hands, and receipts for everything. We bent over the laptop together, two women armed with spreadsheets and steel in our spines, while outside her window, another perfect wedding season afternoon slipped away. The next morning, I drove back to my office feeling like I was walking through molasses. Everything moved slower, heavier, but my mind was racing ahead. Diane's calendar sat open between us, her Mont Blanc pen hovering over the date 10 days out. Final venue payment, she said, tapping the square. $60,000. That's our timer. I nodded, my throat tight. Ryan thinks I've already scheduled the transfer. Good. Diane leaned back in her leather chair, the morning sun catching the silver in her hair. Let him think that. The venue won't start panicking until day 8, and they'll call you first because of your reputation. You know that moment when you're standing on a diving board and your toes curl over the edge? That's where I was. One step forward or back would change everything. What if he checks the account? I asked. Diane's eyes crinkled. He'll see the previous deposits and assume. Men like Ryan don't verify. They expect. I drove home and slipped back into my role like putting on an old sweater. Ryan was in his home office, wedding spreadsheets spread across his desk. The sight of him studying our finances made my stomach clench. Hey, beautiful, he called out. Just double-checking everything's on track. You've got that venue payment handled, right? Everything's proceeding exactly as planned, I said. Not a lie, just not his plan. He pulled up our banking app, scrolling through transactions. Perfect. All the big stuff looks done. He flashed that smile that used to make my knees weak. This wedding's going to be legendary. I forced myself to smile back. Remember what I said about muscle memory? 2 decades of professional poise came in handy right then. The next few days were a special kind of torture. Every time my phone buzzed, I jumped, thinking it was the venue. But Ryan just got more excited, especially about the wedding website he'd been bragging about to anyone who'd listen. The live updates during the ceremony are going to blow everyone away, he said over dinner, 4 days into our countdown. Real-time photos, guest messages, the works. I told my tech guys it has to be perfect. I pushed my food around my plate, remembering the admin login I'd created months ago. It'll certainly be memorable. That's my girl, always understating things. He reached across the table to squeeze my hand. Wait till everyone sees what I've planned. You want to know the worst part? Some tiny piece of me still hoped I was wrong. That there'd be some explanation for Stacy, for the money, for all of it. But then I'd remember that text message, see his casual certainty that I'd just accept whatever he decided, and that hope would shrivel up. The venue's payment deadline crept closer. 7 days. 6. 5. Each morning, I'd check my phone, half expecting frantic messages. But my reputation bought me silence. They trusted Marla Grace Events wouldn't let them down. Ryan's confidence grew by the hour. He started talking about our future more, making plans for trips we'd take after the wedding. All while that website login burned a hole in my pocket like a skeleton key. "Look at this," he said on day 4, pulling up the website on his laptop. During the ceremony, guests can upload their photos, leave messages. It's all integrated. Everyone will see everything in real time. His eyes gleamed. Pretty impressive, right? I watched him showing off the features I'd helped design, remembering how I'd insisted on having admin access just in case. He'd agreed without a second thought, probably assuming I'd never dare use it. "It's quite a platform," I said carefully. "Perfect for sharing moments everyone should see." He didn't catch my meaning. Why would he? Ryan was riding high on his own certainty, never imagining the microphone he'd handed me might amplify truths he didn't want heard. That evening, I sat at my desk while he showered, staring at the venue contract. The payment deadline ticked closer like a time bomb, and I felt the weight of every vendor relationship I'd built over 20 years. One wrong move and it could all explode in my face. But sometimes the scariest steps are the ones you have to take. You know that old saying about the calm before the storm? Let me tell you, living it is something else entirely. The next few days after our little chat about the venue payment, I kept my game face on tight while doing what I do best, planning every detail down to the microsecond. Have you ever smiled so hard your face hurt? That was me, watching Ryan show off his wedding website to anyone who'd listen. "Wait till you see what happens during the ceremony," he'd say, grinning like a kid with a new toy. "It's all synchronized to the vows." What he didn't know was that I'd been up till 3 in the morning, testing the admin controls. The dashboard was mine, all mine. Every guest's phone would light up exactly when I wanted it to. Funny how 20 years of vendor contracts teaches you to read the fine print, right? "Honey, did you double-check the website login?" Ryan called from his home office one afternoon. I kept my voice light as sunshine. "Already handled. Everything's set just how you wanted it." During the day, I ran Marla Grace Events like nothing was wrong. Back-to-back client calls, vendor check-ins, even a last-minute cake tasting for next month's Anderson wedding. You don't let a reputation built over 2 decades slip just because your world's cracking apart. "You're holding up remarkably well," Diane told me over coffee, sliding another stack of receipts into her folder. She had everything organized chronologically. The hotel charges, the flight bookings, those sneaky little cash withdrawals that Ryan thought I wouldn't notice. "I learned from the best," I said, watching her methodical sorting. The venue, payment deadline was like a ticking clock in my head. 7 days, then 5, then 3. "Remember," Diane said, tapping the folder, "we're not just building a case. We're creating a story that tells itself." The night before the wedding, Ryan insisted on hosting an intimate dinner at our lake house. "Just close family," he said. And Stacy, of course, because she was practically family now. I stood in my kitchen, the one I'd designed down to the last cabinet pull, watching her laugh at his jokes. She wore a cream-colored dress that nearly matched the wedding palette, real subtle. "You've done an amazing job with everything," Stacy told me, her voice dripping honey. "Ryan says you're just magical with details." I smiled back, remembering the website dashboard waiting for tomorrow. "Oh, you have no idea." Ryan clinked his glass as dessert wound down. The sunset painted the lake gold through our windows, the same view I'd rebuilt my life around after losing my first husband, the same water that had seen me heal, grow stronger, start over. "To new beginnings," Ryan announced, looking around the table like he was God's gift to second chances. "And to my beautiful bride, who makes everything perfect." Everyone raised their glasses. I lifted mine too, watching Stacy's perfectly timed sip, the way her eyes never left Ryan's face. The wine tasted like ashes in my mouth. Ryan leaned close, his breath warm against my ear. "Happy wedding eve, sweetheart." I turned my head just slightly, letting my lips brush his cheek. "You'll get exactly that," I whispered, and felt him smile, completely missing the steel under my words. Diane caught my eye from across the table and gave me the tiniest nod. Tomorrow was set. The website was ready. And Ryan? Well, Ryan was about to learn that some perfect moments are perfectly designed to shatter. You ever notice how water sounds different just before sunrise? I stood on my dock that morning, listening to little waves tap against the wood. 20 years of wedding mornings, and this one felt like none of them. The lake didn't care about betrayal or revenge, it just kept doing what lakes do. I'd slept maybe 2 hours, but my hands were steady as I got dressed. Funny how muscle memory works. I'd helped hundreds of brides into their gowns, pinned countless veils, fixed endless makeup smudges. Now I was doing it for myself, and damned if I'd look anything less than perfect. This wasn't going to be the story of a woman being robbed. This was going to be about one taking back what's hers. My phone buzzed. Diane's message popped up. "Everything's ready. Receipts copied and filed. Screenshots backed up 3 ways. Fraud report drafted and waiting for my signature. Just say when." I typed back, "After the first dance was supposed to start, maximum damage." Then I added a heart emoji, because some habits die hard. Remember how I told you about those vendor relationships I'd built over 20 years? They really showed up that morning. The venue staff had everything pristine, every chair aligned, every flower fresh, the garden looking like something out of a magazine shoot. The coordinator, Jenny, kept giving me these worried looks. I'd trained her myself 5 years back, and she knew something was off. "You sure you're okay, Marla?" she whispered while checking the sound system. I squeezed her shoulder. "Just focus on the timeline we discussed." Guests started arriving around 10. You could spot the tech-savvy ones right away, phones already out, trying to connect to the wedding website Ryan had bragged about. A few were showing others how to log in, all excited about the promised live updates during the ceremony. If they only knew. I stood in the bridal suite, watching through the window as Stacy arrived. She wore this perfectly appropriate dusty rose dress that probably cost more than most people's monthly rent. The confidence in her walk made my teeth hurt. You know that feeling when someone's been in your house, using your coffee mug, sleeping in your bed. That's how it felt watching her move through my wedding space like she owned it. Ryan spotted her from across the garden, the way his face lit up. Well, let's just say just friends don't look at each other like that. He hugged her a beat too long, laughed a little too loud at whatever she whispered in his ear. 20 years in this business, you learn to read body language. Theirs was screaming everything they thought nobody else could hear. I pulled up the website dashboard one last time. The posts were queued and ready. First, the hotel receipts from his consulting trip. Then the flight confirmations showing he'd upgraded her seat to first class, using our joint account, of course. And finally, screenshots of their messages. The really damning ones, the ones where they planned their little reunion right under my nose. Time has a funny way of moving on wedding days. 1 minute you're hours ahead of schedule, the next you're scrambling to catch up. But not this time. I'd planned this timing down to the second. The officiant appeared in the doorway, all solemn efficiency. "We're ready to begin, Ms. Grace." I stood up, smoothed my dress, and checked my reflection one last time. The woman in the mirror looked exactly like what she was. A professional who'd orchestrated hundreds of perfect moments. Only this time, perfection meant something very different. Walking to my position at the back of the garden, I could hear the guests settling into their seats. Phones chimed as everyone logged into the website, ready for Ryan's big technical surprise. He stood at the altar, beaming like he'd already won whatever game he thought we were playing. I took my place behind the garden doors, gripping my bouquet. The string quartet hit, their first note. My pulse should have been racing, but instead, I felt this eerie calm, the kind that comes when you know exactly what's about to happen, and you know it's exactly what needs to be done. Through the glass, I could see Stacy in the third row, her phone held ready like everyone else's. In about 10 minutes, every screen in this garden would light up at once, and then we'd all find out what just friends really meant. The morning sun hit the garden just right, turning everything golden like nature was trying to paint the perfect wedding day. I smoothed my dress and pulled up the website dashboard one final time on my phone, double-checking what was about to happen. Everything sat ready, waiting for a single tap. You know that moment when you're so focused, even your hands stop shaking? That's where I was. Down at the altar, Ryan looked exactly like the architect who'd charmed his way into my life. Confident stance, that easy smile he used to close deals. He kept adjusting his boutonniere, preening almost. Made me think of all those mornings I'd watched him check his reflection before business meetings that now had different addresses attached to them. I'd planned hundreds of weddings in this garden. Funny how different it feels when you're the one about to burn it all down. The string quartet was warming up, and I could smell the roses we'd woven through the arch, the same arch Stacy had helped design. Speaking of the devil, there she was, sliding into her front row seat like she belonged there. The way she smoothed her dress, checked her lipstick. I recognized the movements of a woman who knew she was being watched. You ever notice how grief changes shape over time? 20 years ago, when I lost my first husband, it was a clean pain, like lake water, deep but clear. This felt different, sharper, more like broken glass under my skin. "Places, everyone," the officiant called softly. The guests settled, phones already raised for that perfect ceremony shot. If they only knew what kind of photos they were about to get. My thumb hovered over my phone screen, right above that innocent-looking publish button. The whole garden held its breath. Well, everyone except Ryan. He was too busy, shooting these little glances at Stacy, all soft eyes and secret smiles. The kind of look he used to give me, back when I thought I was the only one seeing it. The officiant cleared his throat. Dearly beloved. That's when it hit me. Really hit me. There were already 3 people at that altar. Ryan, his lies, and whatever version of me he thought he could keep fooling. Well, time to add some truth to the mix. I pressed publish. You know, that sound when 100 phones buzz at once? It's like angry bees in stereo. I watched it happen in waves. The notifications, the heads dipping down to check screens, the sharp inhales. First the back rows, then middle, then finally the front where Stacy sat. Ryan was still smiling at first. Probably thought everyone was admiring his tech-savvy wedding website. Then he caught Stacy's face. Her perfect makeup couldn't hide how fast she went, pale. Time seemed to slow down. I saw every micro-expression cross Ryan's face as reality sank in. Confusion, disbelief, that flicker of fear when he recognized his own receipts displayed on every screen in the garden. Hotel confirmations, restaurant charges, every single message he thought was safely hidden. The string quartet hit a sour note and stopped. Someone gasped. Might have been Ryan's mother. But mostly there was just this heavy silence, the kind that falls right before an avalanche. I stood perfectly still, the way I'd practiced, back straight, bouquet steady, face calm. 20 years of wedding planning teaches you how to keep your composure when everything's falling apart. Trust me, that's a skill worth learning. Right about then, every phone buzzed again. This time it was Stacy's messages rolling out like dominoes. Our secret forever, and after the wedding, we'll figure it out. And all those other promises they thought would stay buried in their phones. The garden air felt thick with shock and perfume and the weight of 200 people holding their breath at once. Ryan finally turned toward the back of the garden, toward me, and I saw the moment he realized exactly who was in control of his perfect day. All those months of planning, every detail checked and double-checked, had led to this moment. 20 years of reputation built on making wedding dreams come true, and here I was, using all that knowledge to wake everyone up from a different kind of dream. And we weren't even at the part where Diane's fraud report would hit the system. I stood in the doorway of the garden venue, watching phones light up like fireflies at dusk. 20 years of wedding planning had taught me timing was everything, and this moment, well, let's just say the synchronization was particularly satisfying. You know that hollow feeling when you're about to step onto a stage? Multiply that by about 1,000, and you might get close to what I felt watching those first images pop up on everyone's screens. The bank statements appeared first, neat little rows of numbers that told an ugly story. Each withdrawal from our joint account matched perfectly with Ryan's business trips to Stacy's city. The hotel confirmations came next. Premium suites, room service charges, extra pillows, the kind of details that make you wonder how many times they'd laughed about pulling it off. My fingers had trembled when I'd first discovered these receipts, but now they were steady as steel. "What is this?" someone whispered from the second row. The sound carried in that strange way whispers do when a crowd goes dead silent. I watched Ryan's face as understanding hit him. He was still standing at the altar, trying to maintain that easy smile of his, but I saw the exact moment it cracked. His eyes darted from phone to phone, probably counting how many people were seeing his carefully constructed lie fall apart. Then Stacy's messages started scrolling across the screens. The final nail in the coffin was right there in her own words. Our secret forever. She'd even added one of those cute little heart emojis, HUE, detail that made several guests inhale sharply. "These must be fake," Ryan announced, his voice pitched too high to be convincing. He looked around desperately, probably searching for someone, anyone, who'd agree with him. But evidence has a way of silencing even the most loyal defenders. Stacy, for her part, had lost that polished confidence she'd worn like armor all morning. She sat in the front row, blinking rapidly, her manicured fingers clutching her phone like it might bite her. Remember how she'd swept in earlier, all-knowing smiles and subtle ownership? That superiority had evaporated faster than morning dew on a hot day. The officiant, poor guy, he'd done hundreds of weddings but probably never one quite like this, stopped mid-sentence about sacred unions. The silence that followed felt heavy enough to press the air from your lungs. Even the birds seemed to pause there, singing, as if nature itself was holding its breath. I took 3 measured steps forward, my heels clicking against the stone path. Funny how autopilot kicks in when you need it most. Every muscle in my body remembered 2 decades of professional poise, every movement practiced until it looked effortless. The dress I'd chosen, ivory, not white, I wasn't playing at innocence, whispered against the ground as I moved. Ryan's eyes locked onto mine, and I saw fear replace the confusion. He knew me well enough to recognize when I was in full control of a situation. His lips parted, probably to start some desperate explanation. But I already had my finger hovering over the next post, the one that would play my pre-recorded message to our gathered guests. The garden felt like a theater now, with every face turned toward the unfolding drama. Some people were already whispering behind their hands, phones still displaying the damning evidence. Others sat frozen, waiting to see what would happen next. You could practically taste the tension in the air, thick as honey, but far less sweet. Ryan took half a step toward me, his hand starting to rise in what might have been a plea or a threat. I kept my expression neutral, the same one I'd worn through countless wedding day crises. The difference was, this time I wasn't here to solve a problem, I was here to expose one. I pressed the trigger, and my pre-recorded voice filled the garden like a ghost made of truth. Some vows are meant to be heard before they're broken. The words hung in the air, each syllable as sharp and clean as the morning light on my kitchen counters that first day I saw his text. You know that moment when you've been holding your breath without realizing it? When I saw Ryan's face crumple, that's when I finally exhaled. His eyes darted from phone to phone in the crowd, watching his carefully constructed fiction dissolve in real time. The confident architect, always so sure of his designs, was watching his masterpiece collapse. Have you ever seen someone's mask slip? Not just crack, but completely fall away. The website banner flashed its update, bold and unapologetic. Marla Grace Events. now accepting solo bookings. 20 years of reputation building crystallized in that moment. I'd built my business on trust, and now everyone would know exactly why that mattered. Diane appeared at my elbow, solid as oak, the way she'd been since I first opened my business. "It's done," she murmured, just loud enough for me to hear. "Fraud report filed this morning. His access is frozen." She'd timed it perfectly. The legal wheels were already turning while Ryan had been adjusting his boutonniere. I watched. Ryan jabbing at his phone, those manicured fingers getting clumsier with each failed attempt to access our accounts. The panic bloomed across his face like ink in water, first at the edges, then flooding everything. Each access-denied message was another brick in the wall between him and the money he'd thought was safely his to steal. Stacy, perfect, polished Stacy, started backing away from her front row seat like she could somehow edit herself out of the scene. Her eyes darted toward the garden exits, but she must have noticed how every path was lined with witnesses. The friend story was unraveling thread by thread, and she knew it. The whispers started then, rippling through the crowd like wind through autumn leaves. I caught fragments. Contracts, reputation, liability. The business crowd, our shared clients and colleagues, were already calculating the professional damage. Ryan had built his architecture practice on high-end referrals, just like I had. But unlike me, he'd just burned every bridge in spectacular fashion. Standing there in my carefully chosen dress, I felt a strange lightness. The weight of pretending, of playing along, lifted away like morning mist off the lake. My fingers found the engagement ring, the one he'd insisted needed to be bigger, showier, more worthy of us. Of him, I realized. Now. I took my first step down the aisle alone, and you know what? The walk felt different than I'd imagined all those months of planning. Not the triumph I'd pictured, not the celebration I'd designed for other brides. This was something else, something cleaner and colder and absolutely necessary. "Marla!" Ryan called out, his voice cracking on those two syllables. But I kept walking, my heels marking steady time on the path I'd arranged so carefully with my favorite florist. The same path where, just minutes ago, he'd expected to watch me walk toward a future built on lies. The garden air was heavy with late summer warmth and the perfume of roses I'd chosen to match his vision. Funny how clear everything looked now, like rain washing a window. Each step took me further from the altar where he stood, frozen between fight and flight, watching his carefully constructed world dissolve into consequences. Behind me, I heard Diane's voice, calm and professional, beginning to address the guests about refunds and rescheduling, already turning chaos into order, the way we'd planned. My hands closed more firmly around the ring. The metal was warm from my skin, but it felt heavier now, weighted with all the promises it had failed to keep. The crowd parted as I walked, their phones now lowered, their faces a mix of shock and that particular satisfaction people feel when justice arrives dressed in its Sunday best. The professionals among them were already doing the math. How many contracts would unravel? How many clients would step back? How far the ripples would spread? I watched the guests step back from Ryan like he'd suddenly become radioactive. You know that moment when a room shifts and everyone chooses sides without saying a word? That's what happened in our wedding garden. 20 years of planning ceremonies, and I'd never seen one unravel quite like this. Diane appeared at my elbow, steady as always. "The fraud report's already working its way through the system," she murmured. "Every withdrawal, every secret transfer, it's all documented. His charm won't help him talk his way out of this one." I nodded, my throat tight. Remember how I said revenge should be clean? This wasn't about making a scene. It was about making sure the truth had teeth. Right on cue, Ryan's phone started buzzing. Not with congratulations, mind you, but with calls from his architecture clients who just watched their trusted professional get exposed on what was supposed to be his wedding live stream. Ever hear someone's career implode in real time? It sounds like short, sharp conversations and long, heavy silences. No, listen, I can explain, he kept saying, his voice getting higher with each call. But explanations don't work so well when the evidence is still glowing on everyone's phones. I caught fragments: contract review and reconsidering our partnership, and reputational concerns, each one hitting like another nail in the coffin of his carefully built image. You know what's funny? All those years of planning perfect exits for happy couples? I never thought I'd be choreographing my own escape from a wedding gone wrong. But there I was, watching Stacy slink away from the front row, her earlier confidence curdled into something small and sour. She couldn't meet anyone's eyes as she hurried past the whispers. Guess our secret forever doesn't taste so sweet when it's being served to 100 guests at once. I squared my shoulders and did what I'd seen 1,000 brides do, only this time I was walking alone. Down that aisle Ryan thought he owned, past the floral arch Stacy had helped design, my heels clicking against the stone path with a rhythm that felt like punctuation marks at the end of a very long sentence. The lake stretched out behind the venue, catching the sunset in ways that almost made me forget what had just happened. Almost. I held up my engagement ring, letting it catch that golden light one last time. You want to know something? It didn't feel heavy anymore. All those promises and plans Ryan had loaded into it, they'd evaporated like morning mist off water. I remembered the morning he'd proposed, right here by this same lake. "You're my calm after the storm," he'd said. Turns out he was the storm all along, and I'd finally found my calm by walking straight through it. The ring flashed once in the dying light, like a wink, or maybe a warning to the next woman who might trust too easily. Then I let it fall. The ripples spread out across the water, gold-tipped and perfect, carrying away the last piece of the life I'd thought I was building. They say trust is built once, but here's what I've learned. Truth rebuilds better. It might hurt more at first, might cost you something you thought you couldn't live without, but in the end, it gives you back yourself, and that's worth more than any ring, any wedding, any false forever. I stood there watching those sunset ripples fade, knowing Ryan was still behind me, his world crumbling one phone call at a time. The fraud report would make sure he faced real consequences, not just embarrassment. His reputation would carry the stain long after these guests went home. But that wasn't my problem anymore.